Namaste. Hello everyone and hello from India. Welcome to our H5N1 360-degree Connecting Global Expertise with Indian Professionals webinar series. Thank you very much for your participation today. You have joined our second webinar and dialogue session focusing on H5N1 Biosecurity Implementation for Indian context. We will begin our program shortly. I would like to kick off today's program by reminding you some of the housekeeping items that are listed on the screen. First of all, please turn off your microphone during the session and only unmute when required to speak. Please turn on your camera so that we can see each other. Treat everyone with respect. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to message us through the chat box. We will try our best to address your concerns. The chat box is also there for you to introduce yourself. Please mention your name and organization. Last but not least, please avoid phone calls or any disruptions during the session. Note that this session is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel immediately after the session. An evaluation survey will appear at the end of the session. We would greatly appreciate your feedback as it will help us improve future sessions. Thank you very much for your attention. And once again, welcome all to the second webinar of the webinar series organized by the Center for Scientific Research and Development, People's University, Bhopal, India, in collaboration with HSC International, USA. My name is Megha Raikar, and I am proud to tell you that I am a laboratory supporting staff at People's University. It is a great honor for me to serve as the MC for this webinar. If anyone has any issue with audio or video, please use the chat box and we will do our best to help you. To start the session, I would like to invite Honorable Professor Vice Chancellor of People's University, Dr. Harish Rao, Vice Chancellor of People's University, to deliver his welcoming and opening remarks. Professor Dr. Harish Rao, please.
Thank you, MC, for this brief introduction of the program and for listing all the housekeeping items and the rules. So, on behalf of People's University, Bhopal, India, it is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome all our esteemed speakers, panelists, and participants from different parts of the world to the second session of the H5N1 360 degrees Connecting Global Expertise with Indian Professionals webinar series, a collaborative initiative between Center of Scientific Research and Development, a constant unit of People's University, and HSC International, USA. At the outset, I extend my gratitude to our distinguished speakers and expert panelists who have generously agreed to share their expertise on this critical topic. Their participation, despite busy schedules, underscores the importance of global cooperation in public health preparedness. This webinar series is important for several reasons. The world is witnessing unprecedented development in the spread and evolution of H5N1. The first document, cow-to-cow transmission in the US, has raised new concerns, and the virus's increasing adaptation to mammalian hosts necessitates a proactive and coordinated global response. For India, this is an opportune moment to enhance our preparedness by learning from international experience, we can strengthen surveillance systems, refine response strategies, and adopt biosecurity measures suited to our local context. This webinar series serves as a crucial platform to facilitate that exchange of knowledge. I am particularly proud that this initiative is purely educational, voluntary, and collaborative. It reflects our commitment to knowledge sharing. To all the participants, your presence here reflects your dedication to public health and preparedness. I am told that we have 488 registered participants from 10 countries, namely India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, South Korea, and the United States. With that, I officially declare this webinar open and hand it over to our MC, Megha Raikwa. Thank you, and I look forward to an insightful discussion and immersive learning experience. Over to Megha.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Harish Rao, for the welcoming and opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar will be moderated by Professor Dr. Subhash Bhore, and it is my privilege to introduce him briefly. Professor Bhore is an educator, researcher, and biological risk management professional with 25 years of progressive working experience, including more than 16 years in the academic setting and over 8 years in the biotechnology industry. As an International Federation of Biosafety Associations certified professional, he has implemented many biorisk management related programs in Southeast Asian countries. He also served as a subject matter expert and consultant to international development organizations, including Civilian Research and Development Foundation, USA, and Health Security Partners, USA, dedicated to building local capacity to improve biosecurity, biosafety, sustainability, and global health security. With this brief introduction, I now invite Professor Bhore to introduce the speakers and panel members and commence the session. Sir, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Megha. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all our participants from different parts of the world. Today's session is focused on H5N1 biosecurity implementation for the Indian context. As we witness evolving challenges in H5N1 transmission globally, including the first documented cow-to-cow transmission in US dairy cattle, biosecurity measures must be strengthened to prevent potential outbreaks. This webinar and dialogue session will provide valuable insights into how global best practices can be effectively adopted. Now, let's dive into today's topic and hear from our distinguished speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Pankaj Dhaka, an assistant professor at Guru Angad Dev Veterinary and Animal Sciences University, India. Dr. Dhaka will be discussing urban and rural biosecurity strategies in India, shedding light on tailored measures for diverse agricultural and veterinary settings in India. Our second speaker is Dr. William D. Erd. In short, we can call him Bill. He's a senior subject matter expert at Sothar Bioconsulting based in Georgia, USA. Bill will present on adopting global best practices to local settings, highlighting lessons from international biosecurity models and their applicability to India. We also have our esteemed expert panelists, Dr. H.V. Murukka, Principal Scientist and Biosafety Officer at ICAR National Institute for High Security Animal Diseases, India. Our speakers, Dr. Dhaka and Dr. William, will also serve as expert panelists during the panel discussion. I encourage all the participants to actively engage in the discussion and make the most of this session. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin with our first presentation. Before I invite our first speaker, Dr. Dhaka, I would like to introduce him briefly. Dr. Dhaka has expertise in veterinary, epidemiology, zoonosis, food safety, antimicrobial resistance, and farm biosecurity. He holds a PhD degree in veterinary public health from the Indian Veterinary Research Institute and an MSc in veterinary epidemiology and public health from the Royal Veterinary College, London. Dr. Dhaka has collaborated on several prestigious international and national projects and served as an expert consultant for the WHO Collaborating Center for Tropical diseases. He has held international academic positions such as visiting professor at Ghent University, Belgium, and is an editorial board member for multiple international journals in his field. In 2022, he authored a textbook, Zoonosis, published by Wiley. He has received numerous national and international awards for his contributions to One Health and veterinary public health. Dr. Dhaka has published 54 peer-reviewed articles and successfully led multiple biosecurity-focused research projects. He has coordinated, he coordinates India's postgraduate diploma in One Health and mentors students through the International Student One Health Alliance Mentorship Program. With this brief introduction, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Dhaka to deliver his talk. Dr. Dhaka, over to you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Subhas, for this nice introduction. So let me try to share my screen. Yeah, I hope it's in slide mode.
Yeah, it's visible.
Thank you, Dr. Subhas. First of all, I congratulate all the organizing team members under the dynamic leadership of Dr. Harish, Dr. Megha, Dr. Subhas, Dr. Iris for bringing this very important animal as well as public health related topic of avian influenza because of H5N1 to such a large platform. And I'm really honored to discuss urban and rural biosecurity strategies in India as a part of this webinar series. So my focus of this webinar, today's webinar will be, especially my lecture, first I will try to outline the key epidemiological characteristic of H5N1, highlighting why the situation is really alarming, and then to explore essential biosecurity measures critically that sound critical for controlling the spread of H5N1 avian influenza. As I am basically veterinary epidemiologist, so you will get little more flavor of epidemiology in my presentation. So first and first, why we are discussing H5N1. So in brief, influenza has a grim history of causing widespread mortality. with past pandemic claiming tens of millions of lives. You can see these three very infamous pandemics. The first one is Spanish flu due to H5N1. You can see this paper highlighting like 8 genetic segments, means complete segments were from avian counterpart. The second was Asian flu, and here 3 segments were from avian counterpart, and the third one Hong Kong flu, where 2 new segments were there from avian virus. So you can see the how dangerous the things can be. Below these are human mortality, okay, 40 million, 4 million, and 1 million. And now the worrisome observation of these pandemics lies in reassortment potential of the virus. So they can be associated with lethal implications, which necessitate proactive global vigilance and coordinated actions. If we will see recent epidemiological trends, initially H5N1 lineage was considered to be endemic in Southeast Asian countries. To be honest, you can see this a big circle. Um, However, recent epidemiological developments have highlighted very concerning trends, especially it started from 2020, then 21, 22, and early 2024. And this is mainly because of emergence and global spread of clade 2.3.4.4b along migratory bird pathways, which have affected extensive geographical area. First covered the Eurasia, European countries, then it spread to Americas. And unfortunately in Feb 2024, it has been the virus activity has been detected in Antarctica also. So again, this underscores the dynamics and unpredictable nature of this virus. Now see this very comprehensive definition of H5 HPAI from FAO and WOHA. That's a part of global strategy for prevention of this avian influenza. So you can see in definition itself, everything is very clearly mentioned. It's really serious, high impact, transboundary zoonotic disease affecting all 3 components of one health, that is human, animal, and environment. It threatens animal, public health, economies, livelihood, agricultural productivity, and ecosystem. This is really one of the most neglected part, okay, in the research of avian influenza. Now if you will see what weapons the virus having, I will try to enlist 10 topmost weapons. They can mutate very fast. They are having genetic reassortment potential, receptor binding specificity alpha 2,3, alpha 2,6 sialic acid. One is in predominantly in avian, the second one among mammals including humans. I won't go in detail of this part. Then adaptation of the polymerase complex, because of this many mutations are taking place and they are supporting the virus in further expansion. Then polybasic cleavage site, immune evasion mechanisms, broad host range. Again, it's very point of concern, because if you will see, the diseases with narrow host range are really easy to control. Then environmental stability, again, very negative point in control measures. Then zoonotic spillover risk, we will see in coming slides, and epidemiological factor that is very important and which I will discuss in most of that this upcoming slides, like limited biosecurity measures and high density farms can lead to outbreak. So what we are missing? Actually, honestly, since 2018, around 15 high pathogenic avian influenza viruses have been originated from the low pathogenic strain circulating in the poultry. But the good thing is that due to effective control measures, we have eliminated many of the strain. However, certain subtypes like H5 and H7 lineages have adapted, and one among these is over 2.3.4.4b. Now, the real point of concern is mammalian transmission. In recent years, there are sufficient evidences that H5N1 transmission among mammals has increased. And one most notable example is many outbreaks in minks. Okay, recently I gone through the report from Belgium also, but here you can see this reported outbreak in Spain led to culling of around 50,000 minks. Okay, and this outbreak was associated with again one mutation of T271A. Yeah, this is again very serious thing, because of course our dairy industry is again very well developed in India, and very recent events involving cattle infected with H5N1 genotype D1.1 illustrate very critical development. Before this, the circulating genotype was B313. This is strain, unfortunately, okay, this is strain specifically target mammary tissues. Yeah, this is a new phenomena observed recently, and coupled with mutations as PB2 D701N, which can enhance the viral adaptation and replication in mammalian hosts. So this is really concerning event. If you will see the global distribution of avian influenza viruses with zoonotic potential, it has been increased honestly, and especially after this is one data from Impress. Okay, after October 2024. Yeah, honestly, this may be associated with like intensive surveillance with advanced tool. Okay, this may be associated with this, but you can see human figures. Okay, even many outbreaks has been reported among humans also. So this emphasizes the need to understand epidemiological drivers at environmental, biological, and socio-economical level to effectively prevent disease emergence and spread. So now let's see some of the important epidemiological drivers. So this is recent meta-analysis, and let's appreciate the local and global dynamics of, in general, the pathogen emergence. So always remember, friends, like pathogens emergence is not isolated. Okay, it's result from interconnected local as well as global dynamics. And according to this recent meta-analysis, global changes drivers including habitat loss, changes, ecosystem degradation, invasive species, climate change, and biodiversity loss significantly contribute to increase in infectious diseases risk. Again, this slide again highlights like pathogen. Initially, the pathogen typically emerges through zoonotic transmission, moving from wildlife to domestic animals, then to humans. But remember, this spillover is not so easy, because in nature also there are many barriers. But one summers disease dynamics characterized by interaction between susceptible, infected, and recovered population drive pathogen transmission and evolution. So rapid pathogen evolution is again can be influenced by factors such as host susceptibility, transmission efficiency, and environmental pressure. Finally, we know we are well connected, okay, hyper globalized world. So global connectivity can amplify the pathogen spreads. Therefore, understanding these dynamics collectively is critical for effective disease surveillance, biosecurity implementation, and preparedness at both local as well as global level. Here again, you can see we are increasing in number, okay, and by 2050, it has been estimated around 9 to 10 billion population. Air travel is really increasing. Again, as I told, we are living in hyper globalized world, and same over exports of goods, including agriculture products. If you will see the Indian scenario here, you can see whole Southeast Asian region is the hot spot for zoonosis, and this is one very good analysis from Allen et al. And they try to correlate 37 different factors, and based on that, they predicted Southeast Asian region is really at the hot spot for zoonosis emergence. Yeah, we are now most populous country in the world, and as FAO projected, like in future by nearly 2050, 52% increase will be there in the demand of animal protein. Means we need more and more animals, and this demand will be majorly predominant by developing countries. Now come to the Indian poultry sector, a very brief overview. Okay, the poultry sector has experienced rapid growth, becoming a vital contributor to national nutritional security and economic stability. We are producing 5 million ton broiler meat, and we are world third largest egg producer. So even the growth trajectory is also very good. Okay, and currently we are having around 28 billion USD industry, and in future it is expected to grow by 45 billion by 2032. And one again good thing, WOHA recently approved that India's self-declaration freedom from HPI in certain compartments. So again, it's good for our market sector. Again, as per very recent survey, our the good news is that we are growing more with backyard poultry, as backyard poultry play a very important role in rural economics, providing nutritional security, supplementary income, and socio-cultural benefits. However, these small-scale operations often lack adequate biosecurity and have extensive rearing systems. So again, this can pose great risk. This is very important as we know the role of wildlife in influenza virus. India hosts around 370 migratory bird species. This really reflects our rich biodiversity. However, we know like wild aquatic birds are the primary reservoir for avian influenza viruses, usually hosting low pathogenic form. But under stressors, these low pathogenic viruses can mutate into high pathogenic variants, and it can cause serious outbreaks in domestic poultry with zoonotic potentials. Again, a very brief view about the past outbreaks of avian influenza. Since India's first report of avian influenza outbreak in 2006, the country has faced regular outbreak in many regions are endemic, resulting in massive culling efforts and substantial economic and livelihood disruptions. These outbreaks highlight the persistent threat posed by avian influenza. And in 2021, okay, there was very major outbreak in many parts of the India, more than 20 states you can see in this slide. So time to time, the bad things are in news like sudden death of migratory birds and related cullings. Again, this is really worrisome report. First report from small cat, and of course in large cat tigers, already report has been there about the avian influenza, including mortality. So we can say mammalian transmission is also there in the country. So again, this is worrisome. Apart from health-related consequences, the virus can have significant socio-economic impacts, especially for the farming community. Unfortunately, there are very few studies, okay, addressing this aspect, and this is very important. One example study I projected here from Kerala, you can see, okay, direct and indirect losses are there, huge, because of viral outbreak, including the impact on tourism, sharp market reactions, and even we know like egg prices come down very heavily, okay, during the outbreak, even because of rumors also. So this is directly related with socio-economic context. So are we ready to tackle this biosecurity? This is one of the, just for the audience, this is one of the very good, well-suited definition of farm biosecurity from WOHA. So remember, the biosecurity is a set of physical, management, and behavior is very, very important measures designed to reduce either introduction, establishment, and spread of pathogens to within and from the farm. Uh, so honestly, given a broad host range of the virus, that is over avian influenza, the complete elimination of avian influenza is not realistic. So prioritizing biosecurity based on identified risks are very, very important. You can see here classical risk analysis framework where hazard identification, risk assessment, and risk management are the key component. And risk communication is must throughout the procedure, and communication is very, very important, I will say, among these steps. And here again you can see exposure risk. um, Now we are having hazard as a virus with key characteristics. So the hazard can pose risk by various possible exposures, like it's having broad host range, intensive farming systems, mixed farming, low biosecurity, environmental persistence, zoonotic interference, deforestation. Many factors can be there. Okay, I listed some of them. And because of this, there can be a range of negative consequences. So let's see some of the key exposure for H5N1. This include interaction with wild birds, infected poultry, contaminated environment, human-mediated factors such as farm visits, equipment movement, awareness. So therefore, awareness and targeted biosecurity intervention are fundamental in managing these risks effectively. Again, this is point of concern, environmental stability of the virus. So the environment resilience of H5N1 underscores its survival capability across diverse conditions and surfaces. It can last from days to weeks. Here you can see 8 at 4 degrees Celsius in poultry fishes. This environmental persistence necessitate rigorous cleaning, disinfection, and targeted biosecurity measures. Now come to the main pillars of farm biosecurity. I will list in this scenario three very important pillars: segregation, cleaning, and disinfection. Of course, coupled with cultivating a strong biosecurity mindset. So ensure thorough cleaning before applying appropriate disinfectant, because most of the time during our field visit, what we find that like farmer used to clean their sheds, but disinfectant is really neglected part. So that's very important, because you are missing very big link, okay, if you are not disinfecting your farm. So developing a biosecurity mindset is very important. Not only the physical interventions, but psychological commitment from farmers and animal handlers is very important. So a very clear understanding of disease transmission pathway, active risk prioritization, and customized intervention implementation is very important to foster the biosecurity culture. These are some of the main poultry biosecurity related tips, like proper flock management, vehicle sanitations, visitor management, farm specific clothing, then environmental modification so that you can minimize interaction with wild bird population, and of course proper awareness campaign within One Health context. So again, because of time constraint, I won't go in detail. Now come to other very important part. Many of the times we think in cities we are safe, not really. Okay, here you can see one car full of drippings of birds. Okay, we are also not safe in cities. And urban bio environment really pose unique biosecurity challenges due to factors such as live bird market, stray cattle, unregulated livestock movement, and dense human animal proximities, especially in peri-urban areas. So these complicate disease control efforts and necessitate tailored strategies. I will discuss one of the most important risk factor in urban settings are over live bird markets. Okay, live poultry markets generally significantly enhance the disease transmission risk due to high human traffic, poor infrastructure, and multiple direct and indirect transmission pathways. Therefore, intervention targeting infrastructure improvement, hygiene practices, and strict monitoring are very essential. So I listed some of the important other risk factors, like combining housing different species together, housing sick and healthy poultry together, slaughter on site without proper biosecurity, and using muddy floor. There can be many other risk factors in live bird market. So again, it's very risky thing. Here I want to highlight, when I gone through the literature, this is one very good policy by China. They adopted one note policy, means they used to encourage in live bird market daily cleaning. Per week they used to carry out proper disinfection. Monthly there is mandatory rest day, and zero tolerance on carry over or the of the stock overnight. Okay, so this can be very good strategy, very model strategy. Again, if you want more detail, there is very good guidelines by FAO on live bird market. Now come to the high risk population, human population. So individual frequently exposed to poultry and poultry products, such as farmers, market visitors, workers involved in processing poultry, are really at high risk. And the sporadic outbreak already has been witnessed because of H5, H7, H9 lineages. So this underscored the need for vigilance and protective measures in these populations, high risk population. Now come to the India strategy. We are having very well formulated national action plan. So India National Action Plan features comprehensive surveillance, rapid outbreak response, and enhanced preparedness measures. So initiatives like advanced vaccine development and targeted surveillance also going to become this part. Okay, I will I will come to that slide. Now, if you will see in detail over surveillance strategies, there are three parts: regular surveillance, that's in the absence of outbreak. Here, of course, passive surveillance is very cost effective and very important. So, generally, awareness can enhance this better reporting because of passive surveillance. But yes, in such type of scenario, in such type of highly contagious diseases, we must put much efforts on active surveillance. So there is need for regular surveillance targeting diverse potential transmission points, including farms, wet markets, dead birds monitoring, and monitor the water bodies. Uh, so this should be the part of either active or risk-based surveillance strategies. Also, the country as well as the regional level, we are having good SOPs during outbreak and even after 60 days. Third part used to be the for this action plan after 60 days after completion of the outbreak, how to carry out the things. So this is very well detailed SOP document, okay, generally followed by central units as well as state units. Further, this slide outlines key preparedness and capacity building strategies under our national action plan. So it emphasizes routine surveillance, public awareness, rapid response mechanisms, including protocols for zoo outbreak and supportive measures such as compensation fundings, diagnostic network strengthening, that is very, very important, and enhanced infrastructure for crucial and effective avian influenza control and containment. This is very recently our Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairy officials from Government of India, they organized brainstorming session in the view of this ongoing pandemic due to clade 2.3.4.4b, and they emphasized that how to tackle avian influenza within One Health framework. So they recommended like migratory bird surveillance is very important along with environmental surveillance using cost-effective method. While the vaccine advancement are promising, but however, at present, the ongoing challenges necessitate continuous improvement in biosecurity and response strategy. Even ICMR, that is our national, like Indian Council for Medical Research, our national medical regulatory body, it's called for collaborations to begin development of vaccines against avian influenza for humans. And in the end, I will like to enlist 10 very, very important pillars to contain the avian influenza. And this is very wonderful document, very recently asked by FAO and WOHA, that is Global Strategy for Prevention and Control of Highly Pathogenic Avian Influenza. So these are 10: surveillance, diagnostic, lab capacity, data collection and sharing, very, very important. Largely lacking: biosecurity, vaccination, emergency preparedness, change in poultry production practices, risk assessment, and to know the socio-economic consequences in the value chain. So, dear friends, biosecurity remains our primary defense against the avian influenza threat, and successful management really required global, coordinated local, regional, national, and global actions. So, thank you so much for your valuable attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daka, for that insightful presentation on the urban and rural biosecurity strategies in India. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now let us turn to the global perspective. Our next speaker is Bill, Dr. William Hurd. Before I invite him to deliver his talk, please allow me to introduce him briefly. Bill is a virologist by training and a senior subject matter expert in disease surveillance, infectious disease diagnostics, incident outbreak response, vaccine development and production, high containment laboratory operations, biorisk management, and dual use research of concern. He has supported the US government's health security and capacity building initiatives for over 15 years across Africa, the Middle East, and the Southeast Asia. Through his work, he has engaged with numerous public health, animal health, academic research, and vaccine production laboratories across Kenya and South Africa. He will discuss adopting global best practices to local settings. With this very brief introduction, I invite Dr. William to deliver his talk. Dr. William, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Just to confirm, you can see. Dr. Subhash, can you confirm you can see the presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And Dr. Subhash, thank you so much for the introduction. I hope I can live up to everything that you described me as. So I appreciate that greatly. So what I'm going to talk to you about is what I've over the years have been coming to the realization is common sense biosecurity, and how to implement that overseas, how to implement that internationally, based on kind of lessons learned from the 50 different countries that I've traveled to, working on these types of initiatives. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity. So I don't need to go into too much of this. Dr. Subhash gave me a great introduction. As he said, I'm a virologist by training. However, I got, after grad school, I didn't really want to do research anymore. So I jumped into the biosafety and biosecurity world, outbreak response types of activities. Now I'm a senior analyst for Soder Bioconsulting, but I'm also a senior scientist for Pond & Company, so I wear two hats. The Pond & Company is an architect, engineering, and design firm here in the U.S. that supports design and construction of high containment laboratories all over the world. Held previous other positions in research, academia, U.S. CDC, Sandia National Labs, and such. So, why I say common sense biosecurity? What we've learned over the years is common sense is not so common anymore. And I don't know how much sense that makes to the international perspective, but for us, it makes a lot of sense because we all have an instinct, or we all have a basic knowledge that should be driving our decisions. And it's when we second guess ourselves that we run into challenges, I think. And so I try to break it down to the simplest aspects, because what's implementable in your country is going to be significantly different than what's implementable in other countries. And what I want to stress, though, is what you're implementing in your specific country, there's nothing wrong with that. You could make some improvements, you can make some adjustments, but I can tell you a lot of the stuff I've learned overseas has been extremely beneficial for me as I brought it back to the US to implement it in my own institutions that I've worked at. So, and I want to stress that what I've learned overseas has helped me tremendously here in the US and other countries as well. So, and I don't want to come across as I know all, and what we do in the US is the best, because I guarantee that's not the case. I've learned more from you all than I can even remember anymore. So where do we start? So I always start with some basic definitions. The biggest two that we work with is biosafety and biosecurity. So, and mine is going to be more focused on the lab setting versus what Dr. DACA talked about, which was more on the farm and environmental setting. So, when we talk about laboratory biosafety, it's trying to prevent the unintentional exposures to, pathogens, toxins, or whatever we may be working with in the lab. So how do we protect the staff? How do we protect the environment, from accidental releases, things like that? When we look at biosecurity, it's lab biosecurity. It's how do we prevent the intentional exposure. So this is where we focus more on how do we make sure the labs are protected from people trying to steal samples, trying to, intentionally release these agents. And it may not just be H5N1, it could be anything else. And there is documented cases of this happening, where people, samples have gone missing during transportation. Unfortunately, we've had a couple cases in the U.S. where, a girlfriend broke up with her boyfriend and poisoned the donuts with some, salmonella. So, I mean, it could be anything. But in general, it's how do we prevent, intentional exposure to these pathogens or toxins. Now, where we see this, there's a lost in translation depending on who you're talking to. Okay, so biosecurity can mean two different things. And it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a person who works in the lab, biosecurity is what I just mentioned. It's how do I protect, the agents, the toxins in the lab from being stolen, being intentionally released. Whereas if you look at animal biosecurity, it's how do we protect the farms? How do we protect, the animals from becoming infected with something? So, when you're talking about biosecurity, you need to be very clear with the people you're talking about as to which definition you're referring to. Because if you don't clarify, there's going to be a lot of confusion. So if I talk to a vet, I got to be very clear on what biosecurity term I'm using, because they are the same term, and that has led to confusion depending on where we're working. So I just want to make sure that's very clear, because this is a lost in translation, as we usually say, challenge. Now, biosecurity, why are these topics important? There's, threat reduction, non-proliferation types of activities that are ongoing, where we're, individuals are trying to help reduce the threat of proliferation of biological weapons. How do we handle new and emerging diseases? So, for example, the Ebola outbreak of 2014 was a huge problem, where there was thousands and thousands of samples of Ebola all over the world. How did you secure those? Some of these are, this is the picture in the bottom right there is a picture that I took overseas during the Ebola outbreak, and I recommended that they take that labeling off the door, so that they can, better make sure that it's not blatantly obvious as to where all the Ebola samples are stored in case somebody's looking to take them. But then, how do we handle dual use research of concern? So how do we handle, people who are genetically manipulating the viruses in a certain way to do research? How do they, how do they have approval to do that? What regulations are in place to do that? Partnerships are key for doing research, but we also need to make sure that the partners we're working with are legitimate. There's documented cases where people are, impersonating legit companies to, again, obtain the samples or obtain, intellectual property as well. Not just the samples, but the intellectual property that, the universities or research institutions hold. We also look at operations and maintenance of the labs. That's a big issue too for biosafety and biosecurity, because if we don't properly operate and maintain the labs, how is anything that we put in place going to continue to function? And then there's always financial constraints that are always an issue too when we look at implementing biosafety and biosecurity. What we can implement here in the U.S. may not be what you can all implement in Africa or in Southeast Asia, just from a funding perspective. So there are constraints that we have to keep in mind when we recommend or upgrades or specific recommendations that we want to put in place, we got to keep it in mind. What can the facilities afford to operate and maintain? What can they afford to buy? Can they afford, to obtain spare parts? What happens if it breaks? Do you want to have all the equipment coming from an international company, or do you want to use equipment that's more available locally? So we look at all that. Now, for lab biosecurity, these are the typical pillars that we see. So we're looking at physical security. So actually, the physical security of the actual laboratory. And that can be locks on doors, locks on freezers, perimeter walls, security guards, things like that. Personal security are the people that we're employing. Do they have the degrees that they say they have? Are they impersonating someone to gain access? And we've seen that. There's documented cases of that as well. Material control and accountability, that's just knowing what you have in the lab. So having an inventory, making sure that if you have the ability to tell if something has gone missing or if something is lost. Because if you don't have that ability, there's nothing you can do to try to prevent it in the future. Because if you believe everything's there, why change anything? Transport security, how are we moving samples around the country? Are we using reputable transportation companies? Are we using taxi cabs? Are we using motorcycles? Things like that. How are you moving samples around? Because during transport is when those samples are most susceptible to being stolen or for an accidental release, say in like a car accident or a motorcycle accident, and they got a big cooler on the back, and all of a sudden there's an accident and they're all over the road. And then information security is the last one. Information security focuses on, how do we ensure that the information that the lab has is protected from cyber attacks? Or how do we make sure that our inventories are protected? Or, even information on, personal information from any patients that you may be seeing as well, if you're in more of a diagnostic setting. And then from a research setting, information security is how do we protect our patents? How do we protect our intellectual property as well? Because we want to make sure that your hard work is rewarded and it's not stolen and leveraged by other institutions, countries, and so on. So one of the biggest challenges, and this is where communication is key, is to identify what are the needs versus the wants. So whenever we have gone into a laboratory, we've always the first thing we always hear is I want this, I want this, I want this sophisticated video surveillance system with all these cameras and all these computers, and I want these retinal scanners on the doors, I want these badge readers on the freezers. I understand what you want, but what do you actually need to protect the material that you're trying to protect? So it's really communication and getting individuals to talk about why they want that and to help them understand what it's going to take. And the best way that we've come about doing that is to really focus on the risks. And again, it comes down to common sense. What are the risks that you face, and what are the minimal requirements you need to address those risks? Do I need to go 10 steps beyond and make it so complicated that it's hard to maintain, it's extremely costly, it'll be broken in a year, and then it won't function anymore? Or do we use simpler methods that my operations and maintenance staff know how to maintain on a daily basis? So it comes down to, again, common sense. What are you concerned about? What are you working with? And where are you as well? Because there's, if you're in a field setting, it's completely different than if you're in a, metropolitan big city with a brand new lab. Biosecurity in those settings is going to be completely different, and you have to be able to adapt. So we focus on risk assessment and getting them to understand, what are the biosafety risks, what are the biosecurity risks, and how to, prioritizing those risks, because that risk prioritization is key. Because if you fail to, if you want to some risks should be addressed sooner than others. And this is where, the budgetary constraints come into play. So you have to prioritize your risks to, address them in a stepwise fashion. Because ideally, in an ideal world, you would have the unlimited funds and you can address every risk, but that's not the case. We're never in that. Even in the U.S., we're not in that situation. Because surprisingly, even in the U.S., like the biosafety community and the biosecurity community is not that well funded compared to the rest of the institutions at a research university. We're usually very limited, and we have to prioritize ourselves to address what we deem to be the highest risks at that time. As more funding comes in the next year, maybe we'll address the risks that are down one level. But again, it's focusing on the risks, because that's where you're going to really get people to kind of get off of what they want versus what they need. And in our community, we speak a common language, and that's the risk. And making sure that you understand what those risks are is going to be that first big step. But then also making sure people understand that hazard does not equal risk, because there's a lot. This is another one of those lost in translation issues that we come across all the time. Making sure that they understand what risk actually means. And Dr. Dhaka talked about this a little bit, but again, same kind of situation. It's risk should be the decision drivers that we should focus on, and because then we have a documented strategy for how we identified what those hazards are, what those risks are, and how we're planning to deal with it, versus someone coming in and just saying, "Hey, I want you to deal with this because I'm the researcher at the institution that brings in the most money, so you have to listen to me." I've had to deal with that all my life in the research, in the academia. But again, it comes down to what are the risks to the staff, what are the risks to the research, what are the risks of an accidental release, and again, and then also what are the risks of someone trying to steal something that we're working with, be it the agents or the intellectual property. They're both considered extremely valuable. Now the other driver that we got to keep in mind are there are many different guidelines and regulations that are out there that deal with biosafety, biosecurity, design. There's standards, and just keeping in mind what those are and what you have to in your countries adhere to. There are international best practices, but there are also national regulations that in most cases you have to adhere to. Now, that's not always the case. There are countries are working on developing, biosecurity legislation, biosafety legislation. Now, in the past, typically countries have biosecurity legislation, but they're almost entirely focused on GMOs. And they never really address the biosecurity the biosecurity issues around laboratories, being what they're working with, how to secure the agents. Should all labs be working with certain agents? So just keep in mind that when you're looking at different regulations and guidelines that are out there, what's applicable to you, and what should you consider the best practice. Because those are great communication tools. As a biosafety professional, and I have to communicate to my leadership, I use these guidelines, I use these regulations. But again, communication is key, because as an example, this is my ideal beach holiday, me by myself, or with my wife by the water, just relaxing. This is our kids' definition of a beach holiday. Completely different, right? They like the excitement, all the activities. About me, no, I wanted to sit in a chair and relax. So communication is key, because what people will automatically come up with a vision of what they believe you're talking about, but you need to communicate what your vision is to them, so you both are on the same page, and they need to communicate to you what their vision is, so you can find some sort of middle ground. Because if you don't find that middle ground, a year down the road when you're starting to implement something, they're like, well, that's not what I agreed to. I'm like, well, yeah, you did. Unless you effectively communicate what your vision is. And I would say I would definitely recommend documenting what that is, in a way that you both understand it. So if it's, we always adhere to if it's not written, it didn't occur, it never happened, and it was never agreed to. So the more you write down, the more you document, the better off you will be as those discussions come up down the road. Because there are many different types of laboratories that we have to deal with on the biosecurity side, and it's the research labs, diagnostic, forensic, high containment labs, human health, animal health, and their risks are different. The biosafety risks are different. The biosecurity risks are different. So making sure you understand what is going on in those in those individual settings is going to be key to addressing the biosafety and biosecurity risks that are present. Now, one of the biggest things that we've seen that has been missed in many cases is people focus on the labs. They don't focus on what comes out of the labs. Waste management is a huge problem, and it's going to be a huge problem with H5N1 as well. Because how do you deal with all of the waste that's coming out of the labs or coming out of the poultry farms for all the animals that have been culled, or the samples, or the waste, the feces and anything like that? How do you deal with that when it's been contaminated? It's a huge problem, because we've seen, these are actual pictures that we have taken over the years of places we've been to that have been dealing with infectious waste. And it's a constant issue where people don't know how to dispose of it. People are not disposing of it correctly. And this is a big biosecurity concern. We've seen animals in the bio-waste trash eating the waste. That's gonna cause a big problem for spread, right? So just keeping in mind that it's not just the lab setting inside the lab that's the problem. It's also what you are producing and what goes out of the lab. So making sure this waste is handled appropriately is also going to be key for responding to H5N1. And we saw this with the Ebola outbreak as well. It was a huge problem in West Africa. That we had to work with a lot of laboratories to make sure they were properly disposing of their waste, because it was just, in a lot of cases, it was just sitting outside and being stolen. So a couple approaches that are out there for how to deal with the biosecurity risks. The traditional style, the prescriptive base, that's very specific. It's you have to meet these specific requirements. Now, that is not the method I typically try to follow. I choose to follow more performance based, because it allows for local settings to be applied, right? If it's you can use the BMBL and WHO. They have now been updated in the past few years to take more of a performance-based approach to improving biosafety and biosecurity. So they focus on the risks. They focus on what risk needs to be, what risk needs to be dealt with, and potential solutions for how to deal with it. Now, it's up to you as the individual at your local institutions to actually do that, and how you choose to do that is up to you. You can use best practices, but we can, for example, like in the US, we may have, on the entry to one of our high containment labs, we may have a retinal scanner, but that's because we have one. But you in your local setting, maybe you have a little pen pad or a lock and key. The doors are secured. It's just different methods of securing it. But from a performance-based perspective, it is secure. You have succeeded in what you were intended to do. Now, how you do that is completely up to you. Now, we can provide recommendations on what works versus not. For example, we've seen some people put in magnetic locks, like little pin keypads to open up a gate, but you can reach through the gate. You can literally reach through the gate and hit the request to exit button on the back, which will allow the gate to open. So like there's ways you can implement it to be more secure. But what you choose to implement is completely up to you. And I want to make sure that that's clear. Like the performance based is much more effective to allow for local settings versus the prescriptive based. But there are some basic concepts that I think can help the lab setting for biosafety and biosecurity. That's separation of public and private space, and private be in the lab in most cases. So try to design your labs in such a way that, the public does not have access to the labs. We've been to places where this is not the case. The public can walk right into a lab and accidentally expose themselves, gain access to something they shouldn't be touching, and things like that. So basic concepts from the design, particularly the lab design perspective, is a huge help because this will help you secure the facilities if you can separate public and lab space, because only people that should be accessing the lab are the people that should be working in the lab, because they are trained to properly protect themselves and the environment as well. Okay. Whereas the clerical staff, your accountants shouldn't be walking into your lab. They'll be touching stuff that they shouldn't be touching, and they'll accidentally expose themselves. We've seen that too. So it's just it's a simple concept. And as you look at building new labs or renovating or securing your current facilities, just think about how you can separate public and the lab spaces. Other basic design principles, freezers and should be located. Your freezers should be located in secured spaces. Try to locate them in a central location. If you have freezers spread all over the lab, then it's more of a challenge to secure all those. So we typically try to recommend that if you have a central location that you can secure and put more security around it, that'll help you, help minimize the amount of funds needed to secure, say, a whole building versus a single room, right? And so there's ways to do that. I also think it's important that from an operations and maintenance perspective, you need to maintain your freezers, maintain the freezers will build up ice. They will, and that will impact their ability to function properly. So making sure that you do that in such a way that they continue to operate correctly is key. But also the other big thing from a design perspective is freezers. If you have a freezer room like this, freezers put out a lot of heat. And if you don't properly cool the room, you will break your freezers as well. The heat buildup will cause the freezers to stop working. So just keep in mind, if you do something like this, that you are, properly maintaining the freezers in a way that they continue to function. Now, from a biosecurity perspective, we try to always recommend that they try to put them in a central location because it's easier to maintain, easier to know where everything is. But in some cases, it's not possible, and we totally understand that. But it's also prioritizing what needs to be in a freezer room versus not, right? So, we typically prioritize pure isolates of viruses or bacteria versus clinical samples, because sometimes clinical samples may not even have anything infectious in it. At least like the virus we're testing for, if you're testing for an antibody, in the blood or in the serum, there may not be any virus in that sample, right? But but if you're growing up pure isolates of the virus or the bacteria for identification or for research purposes, those are typically where we assign the higher priority to. We usually try to follow some other basic design principles is, using security zones. We try to put wherever our freezers are, wherever our highest assets. And it could be the freezers, but it could also be your intellectual property. It could be, we worked with one institution that's where they're one of their most secure areas where their safe was with the money that they pay the staff, because they actually got broken into and someone stole, the funds for about a month of all their staff, right? So it's whatever you deem your assets to be is where you need to put the security around. Now, from a biosecurity perspective, we usually assign that to the agents or the intellectual property or important documents as well, especially if those documents tell you how to, and if it's a standard operating procedure for how to access the freezer, or how to access or turn on and off the security system. Those are also information that we would want to securely protect. So it really depends on you and what you deem your assets to be. But following a layered security strategy is typically the best, where you can, the further in you go, the more secure it is. And again, the common sense, right? So this is nothing new. This is something that we should, for me, it seems like it would be common sense that whatever I want to secure the most, I put in the middle, right? And I secure it going out. Now, this is a basic concept that, that's why I try to break it down. A lot of it is common sense, and just to rely on your instincts, to rely on what you know and what you've learned over the years, and try not to second guess yourself, because there's a good chance you're probably right on your first one. I was always told that when I took exams too. I always go, whenever you take an exam, anytime you start second guessing yourself, you're probably going to get the answer wrong. Maybe that was just me, but that's usually the case. Graded protection. We try to, this is another one where, as I mentioned, you put your assets typically in the most secure area, and we try to add layers of security in front of that, so that, say, for example, if 100 people access the lab, they'll enter the protected area, which is the lab. Now, the lab building, I should say. If 50 people need to access the lab, then they go into the lab, and they can go through a lock that'll prevent 50 from, will keep 50 out, but it'll allow 50 in. And then you can go to an exclusion area, which is where your freezers are. Maybe there's only 5 people that need access to the freezer. So you put another layer of security in there to cut down to only 5 people having access to that one room. So you can do it in a way that it starts to exclude the people that don't need access to specific things. But then also remember that balanced security is key. So understanding, and sometimes it's a little weird. Sometimes when you're designing security systems, you have to start thinking like a thief. How would I get in here? Right. So, we've run into instances where people have put an exclusion area, they put their freezers in this room, but then there's an unsecured window right behind the freezers. So it's very easy just to break the window and get in and bypass all those security layers. Right. So just keep in mind, how your buildings are designed, or how you're going to go about securing specific areas, to make sure that you are doing it in such a way that you don't leave a vulnerability that can be leveraged to get in. Such as like windows. We saw there was one instance where we were going into a lab, and they had, again, a gate to protect entrance into the building, but then, and it had a card reader to gain access. Right above the gate was this large opening, probably 5. Well, I gotta do meters. It was probably like 2 meters by 1 meter that I could easily slip through. Right, if I could crawl over I could just crawl over. Right, so it's you gotta understand kind of how certain things can be leveraged to gain access to things. So just keep in mind that when you're doing something like this, that you're not leaving a vulnerability. But there are many different design principles. I'm not saying what works best versus what doesn't. But restricting people, limiting the number of people who have access to the highest secure areas is key. And that can be done by padlocks. It can be done by cipher locks. It can be done card readers, biometrics, so fingerprints or retinal scans. There's many different options out there, but you should choose an option that works best for you based on, operations and, your ability to maintain it, cost, replacement parts, all those types of things, because things will break. And if you're ordering all your retinal scanners from the US to install, and your retinal scanners break, it's going to be very expensive to get some sort of a technician or spare parts from the US. Whereas if you use something simpler that also works, that's more of in a local setting, and it's easier for you to replace and maintain. So just, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just that you need to secure something. How you choose to secure, it's up to you. Now, just bear in mind that there are pros and cons to different types of security systems. We run into cases where someone put they didn't think through the process for how they're going to gain access to a lab. And it was the high containment lab. They put a fingerprint reader inside containment, and we already had gloves on to enter containment, right? We entered the hallway with gloves on. How are we going to use our fingerprint to gain access to the lab if we already have a glove on? We can't take our gloves off. So there's situations that you kind of got to walk through as you're and understanding, what PPE you're wearing. If you're going to be carrying a bunch of stuff, you don't want to make it so complicated that you end up creating a biosafety issue. So biosafety and biosecurity got to work together. Okay. And then sustainability is always important. Just please make sure that you're, like I mentioned before, that you understand what, the operations and maintenance I can't even talk today. Sorry. What the operations and maintenance requirements are going to be for anything that you put in place. Because you can put all the greatest security system in place, but if it breaks 6 months later, then you're back to where you started. And making sure that your staff are able to operate and maintain it is key. Making sure you have spare parts. I would say use local if available, or local within your country. Then go out to your region, and then if it's not in your region, then you may have to go out to a different country. But again, I would look closer rather than farther away. Because it's easier to get spare parts and to maintain, especially if you need a technician to come in. In a lot of cases, like for biosafety cabinets, they're very difficult to maintain. So sometimes you need a technician to come in to fix those. But operations and maintenance is a big one that I want to stress, because we've seen that in a lot of challenges have come up as quite frequently. And then just to highlight kind of, one of the things that we're actually working on in India, through SODER, is we have an active project. They're working with high containment labs to support operations and maintenance programs to secure high containment labs in India, and it's looking at O&M practices to identify gaps and challenges, and then to work with the local partners to support in development of operations and maintenance plans, SOPs, to help them and train them on how to how to operate and maintain certain pieces of equipment. Because again, it's a big challenge overseas, and we're trying to address that the best we can. I think the more emphasis we put on O&M programs, the better off a lot of our facilities will be. And I want to stress, the more support we provide to our O&M staff too will help them, because we see in a lot of cases that O&M staff are missed when it comes to training opportunities, certifications, attending conferences and things like that. That making sure that we interact with our O&M staff, so our operations and maintenance staff, that to really support them in the work that they do as well, is going to be a big thing, and which is why we're actively doing that in India right now. We've done it in several other countries as well, including DRC, Gabon, and has gained significant success. So I'm happy to take any questions, and here's our contact information. For SODER, as well as Natasha Griffith, who is the CEO, and myself. What I would say is, if you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to us. What you'll learn about the biosafety and biosecurity community is we are very small, and we support each other tremendously. So We have no problem, responding to emails, phone calls, setting up webinars, setting up if any questions are ever needed, and we're always happy to help. So thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I turn it back over to Dr. Subhash.
Thank you, Dr. William, for the valuable perspectives on adopting global best practices to local settings. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will move to our panel discussion and Q&A session. I encourage all participants to keep your questions ready based on time available. We will take as many as questions and we can get the answers from the panel members. So to start with the panel discussion, the first question is to Dr. William. Because adopting global best practices is very important. So Dr. William, what proven biosecurity practices from BSL-4 labs worldwide could be adopted to India's diverse laboratory settings, ranging from urban BSL-3 facilities to resource-limited rural labs to enhance H5N1 preparedness, and what are the first steps to make these feasible?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we talk about high containment labs, they are some of the most secure labs that we have around the world. And the security around one lab is going to be different than another lab. And that's, again, based on the risks that are present in that local setting. So the driver for all the security that we have for our BSL-4s here in the US is driven by a risk assessment, specifically a security risk assessment, where we look at, well, who are the threats? Who do we envision being, likely to try to break into our facilities? What are they likely to steal? That documented risk assessment is what we use to then design the security systems that we have in place, be it security guards, how many guards, are we using retinal scanners, card readers, are we using pin pads, are we, what type of background checks do we run on the staff who are gaining access to the BSL-4, right? Because that's another big one. So within the US, the majority of our BSL-4s, actually all of them, work with select agents. I don't know if everyone knows what a select agent is. So the US has the US Select Agent program. It's a regulation that the US government put in place to control access to certain infectious diseases and agents. Now, to gain access to those agents, you need to go through a significant background check. To make sure that you're have a good reputation and you're not going to potentially be a person who's going to steal something and use it to cause harm. So, for India, I think, there's a question in the chat too. I think what's important to understand are what are the biosecurity laws that India has in place? Right? What are the requirements that you have to deal with physical security around some of your most secure laboratory facilities? If you don't have those yet, maybe that's something that, as a country or as a as a biosafety or biosecurity association, you can start to look at and put out some best practices and some guidelines. Because I know there is the Asian Pacific Biosafety Association there that includes India, and I have some good friends that are colleagues that are associated with that association. And I think it would be a great opportunity for that association to potentially put out some guidance for biosecurity, because I know I've worked on the legislation side with countries, and it can be extremely difficult to get legislation through Parliament or through Congress or whatever your makeup is. So for our BSL-4s, we're tightly regulated. I'm not sure about yours, I haven't been over to India in a while, so maybe there's been some changes, but I think getting an understanding of what your regulations are around those is going to be the first big step, and then the risk assessment, because that's going to define a lot.
Thank you, Dr. William. The next question is for Dr. Pankaj
Can I
Dhaka.
add a little bit to Bill's this thing? This is Harshad Mulkar from ICR Nissan. Particularly under the Indian context that we were discussing regarding H5N1's this thing. Now again, the confusion which Dr. Bill was talking about has come here. There are two different biosecurities that, so I don't know to Dr. Ahmed which biosecurity he was alluding to. Again, that issue also comes up here. And particularly in terms of this, and also I would like to add, particularly in terms of, because H5N1, Dr. Pankaj gave a very good overview. One of the things that we need to keep in mind under Indian context, particularly when we talk about laboratories, biocontainment laboratories, somewhere down the line, we are also losing sight of the major crux of the issue that we always discuss in terms of safety of the laboratory. Not only for the people who are working, but also the environment that we keep in. What happens is many times, especially post-COVID, there is this kind of a craze which goes in where you are aiming to build a lot of biocontainment labs. Now, when we are in that process, what is happening is we are having a textbook kind of a facility design and kind of a thing which is there, and most of the labs which I've been part of a lot of this consultancy in the as a part of this biosafety thing. One of the major issues that comes is risk assessment, which is actually the key to actually decide what is the kind of lab that you want. Somewhere down the line, we lose a perspective of that, and we actually lay more stress on the facility design. You have got a kind of a checklist that you build for a BSL-3 and kind of a thing, and then that sometimes becomes very dangerous because we need to understand that these labs are not only expensive to build, they are expensive to maintain, and also you need a lot of human as well as financial resources to so that is where it becomes very important for us to keep our perspective. This is particularly when we talk about H5N1, as Dr. Ahmed was asking. One of the key things that we need to understand is what is the kind of work that we are going to do in our labs. If he is meaning about farm, they say farm biosecurity, there are a lot of issues which are there. But particularly if we are talking about lab, are we going to actually culture H5N1 viruses in eggs or wherever, or are we just going to carry out molecular diagnosis? So there are a lot of these things which are part of risk assessment, which becomes more important than actually deciding the kind of BSL-3 or 4 that we were talking about. So that is one thing that we must always keep in mind in the Indian context.
A great comment. It's a great comment from the design perspective. The reason why I got hired by an architect and engineering firm now is because I am a scientist. Architects and engineers, they speak a completely different language than researchers. And in some cases, they like to repeat what they did at other institutions, which may not be appropriate in your setting. So I think, that's why risk assessment should be the design driver, and you can focus on that. The more you will get what you need versus what you want, and need is more sustainable usually.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mulkar, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Dr. William. The next question is to Dr. Dhaka. Question is, how can urban labs support rural veterinary facilities in H5N1 biosecurity, perhaps through training or technology sharing, and what barriers needs to be overcome? Dr. Dhaka.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Subhas, and I want to congratulate Dr. Bill also for wonderful presentation, and I want to welcome Dr. Murakkar sir. Welcome, sir, and sir is one of having great expertise in this area of avian influenza. So I'm sure sir will drive this panel discussion to a great level. To be honest, like if you are asking me, difference is huge difference is there and challenges also there, urban and rural biosecurity, because in rural area mainly we are focusing on farms, okay, a farm level biosecurity. In urban, mainly disease transmission, okay, of course, the source will be from farm level. But if you will ask me, we need to strengthen our surveillance, and especially most of our surveillance now, of course, it's still in initial stages. We are strengthening it, of course, but most of our data generated through passive surveillance. Very few active. Yeah, government of India is putting a lot of focus, especially risk-based surveillance strategies. But again, we need to enhance our passive surveillance, because in passive surveillance the problem is with reporting. So we can aware the stakeholders, and currently there are many field epidemiology programs are going on along with FAO India and our Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying. Okay, they are like strengthening the capacity of local veterinarians to timely recognize the disease. Not only this, but other very important zoonoses also. So this is one of the very important parts. So we need more capacity building program, good data sharing, and yeah, one again very important thing, like we are having limited regional diagnostic labs. So all the burden used to come to Dr. Murakkar sir or Nisad, everything goes there. We need more expansion of these type of national level labs also, as well as regional level labs also. So that's very important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe I
thank you.
could supplement with Dr. Dakas this thing, particularly in terms of the infrastructure that is required for carrying out the massive surveillance that actually a huge country like India is expected to carry out. Few of the things which actually happens is one of the issues that actually comes up is most of the surveillance source of sample collection and this thing particularly is through state departments. And again, it depends on how proactive individual state government is in terms of getting samples in a very systematic way. And one of the unfortunate things that we need to improve upon is take more advice from epidemiologists whenever we are designing any kind of a sampling plan, particularly which is a given actually even action plan of government of India is looking at it. However, many times what happens is because in case of even if it's not only the farms that we are talking about, we are talking about live bird markets, we are talking about individual backyard poultry, we are talking about now very domesticated birds like crows or pigeons. Even crows are one of the major issues, particularly since last 6-7 years. So there are a lot of issues which need to be taken care of, and where epidemiologist role needs to be little bit more pronounced and prominent than we have right now. So that is one of the issues that we really need to address, particularly in terms of dealing with H5N1 particularly in rural setup.
Thank you, Dr. Murakkar, for sharing your views. So our next question is for you, Dr. Murakkar. Your your institution focuses on high security animal diseases. So the question is, what biosecurity protocols are most effective near India's poultry hubs, and how can they be enforced?
See, one of the things, particularly in our context, when we talk about high security animals, basically we deal with all those pathogens which are either not present in our country or which are kind of emerging after a certain period of time. So that is what the work we do. Now, in terms of most of these diseases, particularly one of the things that we also encounter, particularly in terms of biosecurity, and we're talking about this, one is how does it move? Particularly we need to also understand that India is surrounded by a huge international border, and transmission of many of these new diseases which come in. That is where biosecurity becomes extremely important at these international border areas, where so you need to have what we call it diagnostic vigilance, where you are constantly carrying out surveillance in particularly in those areas. Even in our country, within our country, there is a very diverse group of population of individual species of animals. which can be selectively susceptible to different kind of viruses and bacteria, and particularly in terms of its own genetic makeup, the nutrition that we provide, which actually builds up immunity, and then that also exposes them to different kind of viruses and bacteria. So there are a lot of these things which need to be taken care of, particularly when we are talking about biosecurity measures that we take. We cannot, and especially with the kind of open borders and porous borders within the states and within different farms we have, it's not going to be very physically, it's not going to be feasible for us to have very stringent kind of, definition of borders. And somewhere down the line, then again, it again basically comes down to extensive surveillance. Surveillance and of all the this thing is going to be the key, in particularly in our kind of country, and mostly diagnostic vigilance is going to be the major thrust that we actually need to give on to circumvent some of the issues which are very unique for our country actually as compared to other places, because most of our this thing they are at backyard level. We don't have very huge organized farms, particularly whether they are cattle or poultry. So how do we address to this backyard poultry and backyard livestock this thing? That is where surveillance becomes the key actually.
Thank you, Dr. Murukar. The next question is for Dr. Murukar and Dr. William. How do India's biosafety guidelines compare to global standards for H5N1, and where can India adapt or innovate? So maybe you can start with Dr. Murukar.
See, one of the issues here is, it's going to be very difficult for a country like India to have very individual disease-specific biocontainment laboratory. It's not going to be economically feasible, because what happens is many a times, if you are actually concentrating on one single pathogen, and one biocontainment laboratory for one single pathogen, you are going to end up with, I would say, underutilized resource. And biocontainment laboratories are extremely valuable resources for any country. And that is where, everything boils down to risk assessment. I told you, so what happens is, most of the laboratories, particularly the biocontainment laboratories that we are going to build up in our country, is not going to be limited to H5N1, particularly like highly pathogenic avian influenza. They are also going to cater to many other infectious diseases and also zoonotic diseases which keep on coming in. For example, even if we were like, OI reference, DOA's reference laboratory for avian influenza, we still dealt with COVID when the need arose. So that is where, that flexibility always requires to be available. Each lab, what we actually suggest is, that is where, sometimes this BSL 2, 3, 4, when we start designating these individual labs into these watertight nomenclatures, somewhere down the line, we lose the sight that more than these BSL 2, 3, and 4, we need to have biosafe labs for the kind of work that you are doing in your laboratory. And not every lab is going to actually going to carry out culturing. Most of the labs, particularly in the present scenario, are going to limit themselves to just collecting the samples from any kind of a thing, and then just inactivating, carry out some sort of a molecular diagnosis. That is actually what is happening nowadays. And with the kind of technologies developing, things are going to be more and more different than what the actual traditional this thing is going to be. So somewhere down the line, we need to have biosafe labs which can equip ourselves to handle basic pathogens that we can, basic samples that we have, and then decide, which labs would actually be going to be involved in, culturing the organisms and, carrying out mass kind of a thing. That is where, we need to have set some sort of a, kind of strategy to actually see where we stand, that particularly in this case.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, and just
Bill, go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, the risk assessment should be the driver. I guess as we've both of us have said several times, and the key thing to remember is also what work needs to actually occur in a high containment lab versus what work can occur in a low containment. And low containment, BSL1, BSL2, high containment, BSL3, BSL4, or the ag equivalents of that. Because even like diagnostics, for example, in most cases, diagnostics will occur in BSL1, BSL2. because it's easier to process, quicker. Because working in a high containment BSL-3, BSL-4 typically will take you 3 to 4 times longer to do something that you would normally have done, in 1 hour in a BSL-2 will take you 3 to 4 hours in a BSL-3 or BSL-4, just because it takes so much longer to do things. And with the technologies that we have these days, with the real-time PCR, the different systems that are out there, the point of care testing, quick rapid tests, like a lot of those can be done in the field or in a BSL-1, BSL-2, and don't necessarily need to go into a high containment space. Typically, we see the work that occurs in high containment is the culturing of agents that are known to cause disease in humans or animals, right? So, because again, you're not going to have one lab dedicated typically to H5N1. You're not going to have one dedicated to FMD. You're going to have a large lab, and that lab should be adaptable based on what outbreak is occurring at that time. So if you make it so specific that you can't use it for something else, you're going to have a resource that an underutilized resource, like you mentioned. Yeah, and I just wanted to add one other thing from the previous question. One of the other things that we do in our high containment spaces here, especially related to animal diseases, is and it's something to keep in mind too. If we're actively handling H5N1, FMD, any of those agents that can, we can accidentally, expose to an animal in the environment, we will self-quarantine. So if I am handling FMD, I will not go around cattle for at least a week. If I am handling HPAI, I will not go around birds for at least a week. Right. So making sure that you have something similar in mind, because you don't, as the responders, you don't want to be the one spreading it.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, for sharing your insights. Next question is for Dr. Dhaka, because training is very, very important to make sure that we have competent and skillful workforce. So from that perspective, a question to Dhaka is, what biosecurity training is most urgent for Indian lab staff in H5N1 zones, and how can it be delivered cost effectively? Dr. Dhaka.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. To be honest, like most of the points has been covered by Dr. Bill and Dr. Murakkar. And if you will ask me, most important part of the biosecurity training, actually the pathogen is itself, like it required minimum biosafety level 3. So all the guidelines should be followed while handling such pathogens. And again, very important part is proper disease recognition, taking appropriate samples, and again, handling and disposal of the infectious material, because that's again very, very waste disposal is very important. At higher level, proper risk communication is very important to the authorities or to the general public.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Dhaka. Dr. Murakkar, you want to add anything?
No, see, the thing is, we have already discussed most of the things. See, what happens is, not every lab needs to handle H5N1 the way biocontainment labs are required to do. One of the things that we actually are aiming at, that is where, we are trying to develop many diagnostics, and particularly the pen-side diagnostics that we need to do is, we need to have some sort of a presumptive diagnosis right at the field level. That is one thing that takes years. What happens is, in that case, what happens is, you are actually alert. You keep your, the entire machinery, particularly the veterinary department and also the line departments who are associated with, controlling any kind of a disease outbreak, they become active on the basis of the presumptive diagnosis. Then the samples can go to many of these things. As Dr. Dhaka told, you need more laboratories to actually confirm them fast, so that, the travel time of the samples moving from one place to another, it is reduced. So you definitely need more regional disease diagnostic laboratories that we have right now. We may probably be needing more number of those labs, but it is not going to be actually practical for every lab in every district to have some sort of a biocontainment laboratory to deal with one disease of H5N1. Because what happens sometimes, if you would get an outbreak in say from January to or say December to February, then you may not see any outbreak for next 6 months. So what does that lab do in that case? So you need to understand that the maximization of the resources that you have, particularly in terms of your laboratory, the amount of money that you're spending on maintaining those labs, that needs to be always taken uh, into serious consideration before you even decide of planning this kind of laboratories. So for H5N1 particularly, have the kind of a thing where you have got presumptive diagnosis even at state DI labs, and then move on to regional disease diagnostic labs, and then to referral lab. That is what actually Government of India's action plan talks about. So if everybody I would really recommend particularly for H5N1, everybody, it's available on the this thing website, their website, DHD's website. It's an excellent document in that sense. You get a lot of actually uh, idea as to how H5N1 diagnosis and surveillance in our country actually is progressing. So I would recommend everybody goes through that action plans, this thing of the DHD.
Thank you, Dr. Murukar. Now, my next question is to Bill. Dr. William. You have a wonderful experience. You worked in number of countries in Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asian countries. So the question for you is, how can India prioritize biosecurity upgrades in labs with limited funding, drawing from your experience, supporting capacity building in Africa and Asia? Maybe you can share your thoughts, William.
Yeah, I keep repeating myself, but with limited funding, you need to prioritize based on what the risks are for your local setting. And again, it's risk assessment based. So having a documented risk assessment is going to be key, right? And but you also need to understand your local situation. Are you working in an area that has a high crime rate? Are you working in an area that has large protests? Are you working in a poverty-stricken area where they might break in to steal the computers, the money, the furniture, the beds? We've seen all that during outbreak responses, especially during Ebola, when people were breaking into the emergency treatment units and stealing the mattresses because they didn't have a mattress for their own house, right? So you need to understand kind of the local situation that you're in, and to make sure that you're addressing the risks that are most relevant to you. Now, the risks that are relevant to us here in the US are going to be completely different than the risks that are relevant to you. So like in the US, one of our highest risks at some of our research labs are animal activists. People who are trying to break in to release the animals because they think we're torturing them. That's one of the bigger security risks for us, right? Maybe that's probably not a risk to you, but I've also worked with a facility where a veterinary facility where the local population wanted to break in and steal the animals so they can eat them as well. So you got to understand the situation that you're in to make sure you have the appropriate security measures to address that specific risk. You can't use security standards from the US and apply them to India. You can't use security standards from Europe and apply it. You've got to focus on your local situation. That's the best advice I can give, I think.
Thank you very much, Bill. Because we are running out of time, so I want to ask one.
Could I just add one thing to the training topic, though? I didn't get a chance, and that it gets missed a lot. If you don't mind.
You want to add something, Bill?
I want to add one thing to the training to the training question.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Please educate the community. Please educate the community on how they can protect themselves. It was only when we started doing that during the Ebola outbreak that we started to improve the outbreak. We started to decrease the spread. Was engaging the local community, communicating to them on what needs to happen to protect themselves. We focus on the labs, but we sometimes forget about the local community. And you need to communicate with them as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. This question is for three of you. All panel members. Actionable item means because I just want to share. We need to hear your thoughts. So, for an Indian lab technician today, what is one immediate biosecurity action for H5N1 based on your insights? Maybe you can start with Dr. Murukar.
See, training is extremely important. One of the things, particularly in terms of lab technicians, what happens is because lab technicians are more adept towards actually carrying out tests more than handling the pathogens. There has to be some sort of an orientation in the kind of training that we give to lab technicians, particularly in terms of two things. One is keeping them safe. The other thing is how do they take care of the lab waste, particularly the biomedical waste that they generate. And you need a absolute proper formalized training particularly for the lab technicians to address to those things. Because many times what happens is lab technicians are not only responsible for assisting other people in actually diagnosing or the tests, they are also involved in actually all the important biosafety related activities, whether it's reconstitution of disinfectants, or decontamination, or use of autoclaves, or use of decontamination of the biomedical waste that they generate. How do they place this thing? How do they maintain the biosafety camp? There are many of these issues which this thing. So training is going to be the key. So some sort of an orientation needs to be given. For example, in most of the biocontainment labs, what they do, anybody who actually wants to start working inside the lab is given a training, some sort of an orientation. They give exams related to biosafety, this thing, because that gives, in addition to them knowing what happens, it also passes on the message that biosafety in this particular lab is a serious business. So somewhere down the line, this feeling that, okay, I need to be very particular and very conscious of all the biosafety related actions that one is supposed to take in a laboratory in terms of SOPs, in terms of work practices and everything. That is the actual key. So training for me, is the number one requirement for lab technicians.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Dhaka, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks. Most of the important points has been discussed, but if you will ask me, regarding lab technicians, Dr. Murukar sir already explained very well. But if the technician is going outside for the sampling, then I can say most important part is take care of him or herself, and proper risk communication, community engagement. That's already Dr. Bill told. Okay, that's very, very important. Taking community into confidence with proper awareness in the community. That's very, very important to break the chain of the open infectious agent. So I will like to add this one at field level.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dhaka. William, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just quickly, when you're training staff, we found that it's more effective. It's to get them to adhere to procedures if they understand why they're doing something. Mm-hmm. So don't just train them on, you need to do this, and this. Go into detail, explain why they're doing it this way. Because I guarantee you, if you don't explain why, they will find a shortcut at some point and will likely expose themselves. Go into the detail, go into the whys.
Excellent. So there is one question from one student, I think maybe most probably our student. So that student is asking, this question is for Dr. Dhaka. Does India have biosecurity law, Dhaka?
Yeah, we are having law not regarding farm biosecurity. Okay, that's different. That's voluntary practice, and of course must to do to protect your animal. But we are having law related with like biotechnology law or agriculture related law, like even quarantine laws and various laws are there, but not regarding farm biosecurity. Regarding lab biosecurity, I think Murukar sir can explain more.
Okay, thank you
See,
very much. Yeah, sorry. Dr. Murukar, please go ahead.
no, see, just this thing. See, what happens is we don't have actually. It's mostly like what has happened is it is integrated into biosafety related issues itself. So we don't have specific bio laboratory biosecurity related this thing because somewhere down the line that realization is still not as serious as maybe in many other countries regarding the biosecurity related issues. So we still don't have a robust or independent biosecurity related regulations in place right now. Mostly they are like a part of biosafety regulations that we have, which have been formulated under this thing, RCGM rules. Right, this thing.
Oh, wonderful. So I wish we could have more time, but we are running out of time. So before I close the session, is there any question from participants? Please just unmute yourself and ask question to any panel member. This is your golden opportunity. So you just unmute yourself, ask the question. Anybody from the floor, virtual floor? Okay, so if it's not, then I think we can proceed to to conclude the session. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So as we conclude today's session, I want to thank our speakers and expert panelists for sharing their expertise and time with us. A special thanks to all the participants for engagement and thoughtful questions. We highly appreciate. So I think, participants deserve appreciation because we were supposed to finish 25 minutes ago, but still participants are there. So thank you very much for staying back and making this wonderful dialogue session more interesting. So for the closing, I pass it to our MC. So Ms. Megha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhuri, for moderating the session. On behalf of the organizing committee, the Center for Scientific Research and Development, People's University, and HSC International. First, I want to thank Dr. Pankaj Dhaka for an enlightening and informative talk on H5N1 Urban and Rural Biosecurity Strategies in India. I thank Professor Dr. William R. for sharing his thoughts on adapting global best practices to local settings. I also thank Dr. H.V. Murukar for serving as a panel member and sharing his thoughts. Thank you, Professor Dr. Harish Rao, Vice Chancellor of People's University, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join this webinar and dialogue session. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to Honorable Dr. Megha Vijayvargiya, Trustee and Pro-Chancellor of People's University, for her unwavering support to this webinar series. Last but not least, I would also like to thank all the participants from various countries for joining us for this webinar. I believe that this webinar definitely helped you to get some insight and fresh perspective on H5N1. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it was a great session today. Before ending this session, we would like to hear feedback from all participants by scanning the QR code on the screen or go to the link shown below. The link is also posted in the chat box. We promise the evaluation survey will not take more than 2 minutes. Your feedback will be greatly appreciated. I will keep this live running for a few more minutes. We look forward to having you join us again in the next session. Thank you again, everyone, and we wish you good health.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Subhas, for your all efforts. Thank you.
I hope that everyone has given their feedback. Please note that you will receive your e-certificate within the next few days. I will now conclude the meeting. See you soon at our next webinar and dialogue session scheduled for March 26, 2025. Once again, thank you. Namaste.